Good afternoon and welcome to today's Transformative Leadership Panel, our boardroom problem, improving diversity and developing strong female candidates. I'm Ann Kohler, founding partner and chief operating officer at the Empower Group, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. For those of you who don't know, AWESOME, which stands for Achieving Women's Excellence in Supply Chain Operations, Management, and Education, is the preeminent women's professional group for the supply chain industry, with more than 1,500 senior women leaders making up the organization. Their goal is to advance and transform the future of supply chain leadership. And one way to do that is by hosting virtual events like today's panel, where senior women leaders in supply chain can be recognized and share their insights on hot topics in our industry and beyond. In today's conversation, our amazing panelists will be discussing the ever important topic of board work, and particularly how we get more women on boards. Before we begin, I'd like to share a brief overview of my background. I started my career at Ernst & Young as an auditor and moved into a number of controller and CFO roles through multiple mergers at First Chicago MBD, Bank One, and then JP Morgan Chase, where I was the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, reporting to the CFO. Almost 25 years ago, I started my own consulting firm with my partner, focusing on strategic sourcing and supply chain management, serving global Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries. I have been on nonprofit boards for over 30 years, and I'm looking to move into corporate and private company board service. So I am particularly interested in what our panelists have to say today. Joining me on the call today are three incredible women. First, we have Francesca DiBiase, a board director for Norfolk Southern and Cisco. We have Donna Zarcone, a corporate board director for CDW, Cigna, Duchossoise Capital Management, and Quinnox. And we have Suzanne Burns, a partner at Spencer Stewart and a board member for Banco Dental. I cannot wait for you to hear all the fabulous insights from these accomplished women leaders. So as the panelists talk, we encourage you to utilize the chat function and please submit your questions through the Q&A function. During the Q&A portion at the end of our program, we will answer as many of your questions as possible. So now let's get started. We want to begin with a level setting poll. The AWESOME team is going to launch that now for you. So our poll is, do you have any board experience for a public company, private company, or not-for-profit? You can select, you have multiple choices here, so please select all that apply. Yes, public company board experience, yes, private company board experience, yes, not-for-profit experience, or no, none of the above. And we'll give everyone a chance to respond, and then we will share the results. Okay, so we had 53 respondents, and about a little less than half had, no, none of the above. 55% had just not-for-profit experience. 6 had private company experience, and 6 had public experience. So thank you for responding to the poll. Very interesting. I'm sure everyone is going to be very interested about what our panelists have to say today. So I'd like to get started. I know I am interested to hear about each one of the panelists' journey. So if you could tell us about your journey, and particularly how did you get started? And Suzanne, we're going to start with you.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today, and really excited for the discussion we're going to have. I'm Suzanne Burns. As Anne mentioned, I'm a partner with Spencer Stewart, and actually specialize in the area of board and CEO recruitment for Spencer Stewart, who is a global executive search firm, if you're not familiar with us. And I was fortunate very early on in my career, back in my 20s, which is a long time ago, that I had a boss who encouraged me to start a nonprofit board service as a way of giving back in the community. And said it's really our responsibility as leaders to do that, as well as part of your own personal leadership development, to learn how to influence without authority, to work with diverse groups of people, and to be passionate about what you do and give your gifts forward. So I started on nonprofit boards a long time ago, and have continued that throughout my career. As I moved up in my career, I was mostly in the industrial space, both manufacturing and distribution, with companies like Eaton Corporation and IDEX and W.W. Grainger. I had the opportunity to run global P&Ls. I was a chief talent officer and ran M&A integrations, and accumulated a number of different opportunities to be able to interface with the boards of those companies as a presenter and sitting in a boardroom meeting. So was able to compare and contrast what it meant to be on a nonprofit board versus a for-profit board, and the type of dialogue that goes on in those. So became more familiar with that over time. As I continued in my nonprofit board career, I started chairing different committees. So nominating and governance committees, compensation committees. Actually was asked to serve on ad hoc committees to select the next chair of the board, review governance bylaws, etc. And so that's a whole different skill set, is to learning how to chair committees. And then several years ago, as Anne mentioned, I joined Benko Dental, which is a for-profit board. And I chair the Growth and Diversification Committee, which is mostly focused on M&A, and also sit on the compensation committee of that board. Today, about 50% of what I do at Spencer Stewart is placing new board members. So I hope to provide those insights during our discussion today.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. Francesca.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks for having me on the panel today. It's wonderful to be here with these amazing other women. And like Suzanne said, I also started my non-for-profit board journey when I was younger, and got involved with some local community non-for-profit boards, which was great experience. And it's great to see, over half the panel having that. And it's just a great start as you start thinking about moving into for-profit board roles, which I know most of you are doing. So I'm going to spend just a little while talking about my journey to get to the for-profit board roles, because I think Suzanne very eloquently covered the non-for-profit piece. So I started my journey for profit board journey about 2 years ago when I retired. I was a senior executive, C-suite executive at McDonald's Corporation. And at McDonald's, there was a policy that members of management could not join a for-profit board. So that's why I started when I retired. And the first thing that I did, which I would recommend to all of you, is to complete your board bio. I used a communications board expert, which helped me focus on what were my unique selling points and connected to what boards were looking for. For me, the board bio is very different from your resume or looking for a job. And for me, this was a good starting point, that I had something to share with search firms and other contacts. It connected me with who I was and how I would look at myself as a board member and not an employee. And it helped me to focus on what my interests were, whether I was interested in public board service, PE, private companies and any specific companies I wanted to target. And from there, I put together an Excel spreadsheet of contacts, who can help me, people I knew well, my former CEO, board members from my company, board members that were my fellow board members on the non-for-profit organizations I was part of, having a background in supply chain, suppliers, and of course, search firms. And I ended up with an Excel spreadsheet of over 100 contacts, and then wrote an intro email and sent that to about 5 to 10 contacts every week, shared with my preliminary board bio, just asked if I could meet for coffee or get together for a Zoom call. And I ended up with so many contacts, and people were so kind and wanted to help, and I got such great advice. And so for me, that journey finished with the personal contacts on my Excel spreadsheet, leading me to be put on a slate to interview for the 2 public company boards that I eventually joined, which, as you mentioned, Dan, is Norfolk Southern and Cisco. Both of those came from my contact list. One came from a supplier that I worked very well with, who was part of the NomGov committee at Norfolk Southern, and shared my board bio with that organization. And the other was from a board member from McDonald's, who shared my board bio with other board members that he knew, and got to Cisco that direction. So, it's really, in my mind, almost a full-time job to start this search. It's not for the weak of heart. And it does take some time as well. I would say my first position I got after about 6 months, and the second one about 4 months later, which I understand, and Suzanne can probably help us here, is a pretty quick time frame.
Francesca, thank you. Donna?
Thanks, Anne. And this is interesting, Suzanne and Francesca, because we did not compare notes on this question as we were preparing, but there is definitely a recurring theme here. So my journey to corporate board work started years before my first public board company board. I came up the CFO path early in my career, and then became CEO of Harley-Davidson Financial Services. And my early board work was as a CFO, where I started serving on nonprofit boards and trade association boards in my late 20s and early 30s. And I gained valuable experience from these boardrooms, including learning to lead by influence, Suzanne, as you said, especially when you're trying to get a group of volunteers to deliver on their commitments and help these organizations grow. I also learned the difference between the board role and management's role, and not to overstep into management space. So that prepared me well to go to corporate board work. But really, the next major step in my journey was when I became CEO of Harley-Davidson Financial Services. And then I was appointed to internal boards that were set up. As a financial services company, we had subsidiaries, including a bank. And I started serving as the chair of our wholly owned bank board, working with our regulators to assure appropriate compliance. Great experience. I also was doing trade association work, and I was often asked to speak or present on panels, which brought more awareness to my role at the company. And I became involved in Young Presidents Organization, which there weren't very many women presidents at the time. And so that also gave additional awareness to my role and what we were doing at Harley. And also the juxtaposition of a woman running a financial services company for motorcycles was a little bit of a fun background. So I joined my first public company board in 2005 at the age of 47. And I was recommended by a partner, Suzanne, at Spencer Stewart. And she had been a partner that I had worked with extensively to build out my leadership team when I became CEO. And she just happened to be having a hallway conversation with one of her partners regarding a search that he was conducting. And they were looking for somebody that could serve on an audit committee, and also maybe some diversity as well. And so she suggested that he speak with me, and that led me to the Cigna board. But I would say, Francesca, as you were saying, in fact, all of my boards have come from recommendations of people who knew me from my work on internal boards, on nonprofits, on industry trade associations, community groups, and YPO. And even, for example, 5 years after I left Harley-Davidson, I had started my own consulting business. And one of my referrals that led to the CDW board came from the lead independent director at Harley-Davidson. When he was on that board, he had seen me presenting for many, many years on the other side of the table. He tracked me down and he recommended me to be on that board and serve with him. And so I guess the one point that I'd like to close with, Anne, is that you never know when or where you're planting those seeds in that network and in that journey, but just keep in mind that you are being observed and your performance is being noted, and how you show up and deliver, even if it's a nonprofit board or a trade association board, is very, very important in establishing your own personal credibility.
Wow. Thank you to all three of you. That was really very inspiring, and you've given us all a lot of great tips. I'm going to move on to the next question. So in your years of experience, what have been the key elements of a truly successful board? And Donna, we're right back at you.
Okay, Anne, I'll get us started, but this is really going to be a dynamic conversation. I would say, just to start with, let's frame the board is responsible for governance and oversight as the corporation seeks to create long-term sustainable value for its shareholders. And to govern effectively, the board must function as a high-performing work group, just as you've worked with teams in your own organizations. So how do you get that dynamic? How do you create that effectively? And first, as in my leadership roles on boards, I start with the board's skills matrix, which is designed based on the corporation's strategy to create long-term value. So here, the long-term strategic view is absolutely critical. With that as a base of the foundation, then we can define what skills and requisite domain expertise, functional skills are really needed for that board to be able to fulfill its oversight role as you look further down the road. You know, also taking into consideration new regulatory requirements, current industry trends, environmental issues, ESG, go on and on with all the different pieces that need to be taken into consideration. But by utilizing that skills matrix process, we are building not just the board of the moment and responding to current, but really are focusing on building the board of the future, because we're looking longer term. And so the skills matrix can help you with identifying the skills gaps. So where's the board today and what specific expertise is needed in the future. But regarding the less tangible skills, it's a little harder, and there's a lot more nuance that's needed and more judgment. So I would just add that in addition to having all the, the functional expertise or specific domain expertise, I believe there are three core qualities that are really necessary to be an effective board director. And my three are, number one, intellectual curiosity that drives one to be a lifelong learner and to stay current on key board issues and topics such as ESG or cybersecurity, as well as trends in social and macroeconomic and geopolitical issues. So really be informed and be a lifelong learner. Second is how you show up in that boardroom. So confidence and experience to engage effectively with a point of view, because you are there to have a point of view, but humble enough to listen and learn and share the space in the room so you're not the only one talking, which I'll stop here really briefly after the next one, so I'm not the only one talking. Third and last is passion and interest in the company and the industry, because you need to really invest the time to truly understand the company as well as the industry, and come well prepared to the meetings, and then add value in the boardroom. I will tell you that there have been days when I needed to read 500 pages in a weekend to prepare for a meeting because there was something extraordinarily different going on. Or I had one situation where I had 20 board calls in a 1 month period because we were working on a large M&A transaction. So if you want to do this, you have to be willing to put in the work. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Donna. Francesca, you want to chime in and add anything?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anne. Donna briefly mentioned the future of the American board, but she's being very humble. She was one of the co-authors of the future of the American board. And if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend that. It was really helpful to me recently when I became the chair of the GovNom committee at Norfolk Southern. So a plug there for that. So I think Donna really laid the foundation of, all the key pieces of the skills matrix that need to be taken into consideration as important elements of a truly successful board. And so I would just add one point, it may be a little bit sharper, is around board culture. So I personally got some great advice when I was looking for my first board role. I spoke with a woman and she said, when she thinks about her, potential future board directors and peers, she does the island test. So her question is, can I be there with these people, or do I take a chance with the sharks? And I thought that was just great. I think the board dynamic is so important that everyone feels that they're able to contribute, that they can discuss and debate in a way where they can disagree, but not be disagreeable. That you're working on an ethical board, that the board has fun. And when you think about the management and the board relationship, I think the CEO and the leadership team, you should feel that they're being open and transparent and that they're actually looking for the input from the board in their decision making. And finally, I know there were some questions to start with regarding women in supply chain, and if that's an advantage coming out of COVID and people better understanding the role that supply chain plays in an organization. And I know you mentioned that was the question that we received. It certainly helped me with both of my board positions. Supply chain expertise was one of the qualifications that they were both looking for. Having said that, I would say having broader strategic experience as part of the senior management team and having significant boardroom experience as part of the senior management team sitting on the management side of McDonald's, these were really important factors. And I think especially for most of the people on the call that are looking for their first for-profit board role, how you can link any board experience you've had, whether that's with non-for-profits or whether that's, within your own company sitting on the other side of the table, that will really help to differentiate you as well. I think that's important.
Great, thank you. Suzanne, you want to chime in?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge, similar to what Francesca did, is Donna role models all three of those characteristics that I've seen her in action, and she's just incredible. And Francesca, your point about culture, I just wanted to echo that as well. When we place board directors, we're really looking for that cultural fit. Times might be good now and things might be going well in the business, and then something turns, and are these people that you want to be in the trenches with when you have to have multiple calls over the course of a weekend because you're fighting some fire or something is going on? So that I would strongly encourage be part of your litmus test. So many people are approached about their first board and flattered that they're considered, that they jump into something without really doing their due diligence, and a cultural fit and the values of the organization. I always encourage people to really look strongly at that and make sure that the values are aligned. And also, as part of your due diligence, testing for the overall alignment of the board members. It's great to have differences of opinion on a board that can constructively and professionally debate topics. That's a value add. But to do so in a way that is inclusive, particularly since this is an audience of women, making sure that there is a respect for diversity and inclusion on the board is also important, and understanding why you're at the table and what they expect of you, so that everybody can fully contribute. And then I would also say that the more perspective, to Francesca's point about strategy, and especially with supply chain professionals, if you have global experience, that you can bring to the table as well. The broader the perspective you can bring and that others bring, the more robust the conversation. So you don't necessarily want to serve on a board where everybody's very niched and only sticks to their lane. You end up with much more robust dialogue if everybody can contribute from a strategic perspective.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Let's pivot now to talk a little bit about board diversity. And you've probably all seen the disappointing data from the 50-50 Women on Boards project. It showed that board diversity is at a 7-year low. So we're going to ask the panelists, what are your thoughts on this? Are things that bad? And I know Suzanne has some other data she'd like to share with you. So I'd like to send it off to Suzanne. Suzanne, you're on mute.
Thank you. I understand where the data that was shared came from, and it is from the Russell 2000, which is kind of more of a mid-market, but Spencer Stuart every year for the past almost 40 years puts together an analysis called the Spencer Stuart Board Index. And it's focused on the S&P 500 and what trends we see going on within that group of boards, which are really the top tier boards that everybody aspires to. And the really good news is overall, a women representation on boards has steadily increased. Women now represent 33% of all S&P 500 directors, which is the most ever. And it's been steadily increasing over the last couple of years. So we hope and believe that trend will continue as boards have more exposure to the women that are sitting on the boards today, and it becomes more of a strategic need to have diverse points of view on the board and represent, in a lot of cases, their customer base to be able to inform strategic decisions. For those of you on the call who may identify as a diverse minority, there's good news there too, in the fact that has been steadily increasing really since the social justice movement accelerated in 2020. We've seen a noticeable uptake in that, and after this panel has concluded, we've provided some slides that give you much more granular detail about the numbers that I'm speaking to, but just overall trend, that's up as well. So currently, close to half, 48% of all S&P 500 directors are considered diverse, whether it be from a gender or racial or ethnic perspective, or LGBTQ plus, now that disclosure is on the rise as well. So I think we have good news all around there. The other point I'd just like to make about diversity in general is often when we're asked to recruit somebody for a board, one of the first questions I ask is, why are you asking for this particular demographic relative to strategic objective? You know, we're not interested in just finding a woman for the sake of finding a woman or another demographic profile, but help me understand what it helps to further the strategy. And I'd encourage all of you, when Francesca was talking about her board bio earlier, is to highlight your board brand relative to how can you contribute strategically on a board, and find that linkage with the board that is strongest to help them benefit from your strategic knowledge and for you to be able to contribute there as well.
Thank you, Suzanne. Donna, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to just add, and Suzanne, thanks for sharing your information and posting it after this. I did look through your deck, and one of the challenges I think is that board refreshment is a slow process. Board turnover is a slow process. And it's very important for boards to continually refresh and to ensure that the skills are fit for that future purpose, as we talked about. So as I noted earlier, while we want to be building the board of the future, we want to make sure that people have the skills and experience to guide the company forward. But in our criteria that we use in the boards, the public company boards that I'm on, we do have what was commonly referred to as the Rooney Rule, which is that we ask to make sure that every slate we get is a diverse slate. It doesn't necessarily mean that the diverse candidate will be the one that's selected, but we want to make sure that we have a true representation. And the reason that we do that is because I believe personally, and the boards that I support believe that diversity is a key factor because it greatly benefits the corporations where we serve. Because when a board is comprised of members of a mix of backgrounds, and let's talk about a really broader mix of gender, of race, of ethnicity, of age, of geographic experience, of industry experience, technical versus non-technical or professional experience. And you combine all that into this recipe that includes a range of tenure in the board, a very rich conversation ensues that includes points of view from many different angles. And how do you make the best decisions possible? You do it by having this really highly valuable outside-in perspective. That's what diversity brings, and that's why it's so important. And I've seen it work in the boardrooms where I serve.
Thank you, Donna. Francesca?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that Suzanne and Donna have said. And things are improving. They're still not where we want them to be, and there's work to do. For me personally, I sit on 2 Fortune 500 boards, and they are quite diverse. So we're seeing more, the results that Suzanne talked about than in the 50-50 survey. One of my boards has a woman chair. There are women and people of color leading committees. So I feel that I've had a good experience. But having said that, it was important for me to join a diverse board. So maybe I self-selected a bit by passing on some interviews with companies that did not have diverse boards. So, as you look at that, you can, go on websites and see for yourself the diversity of the current board. But, what can we do to continue to increase diversity on boards? And I think one of the most important things you can do when you join a board is to try to get on the governance and nominating committee. This is where boards start the process, and it's really the best way to bring in diverse talent. You heard Donna talk about the skills matrix. Obviously we have search firms that help us with a slate of candidates, but that slate is also gone through with the governance and nominating committee. That committee is the one that interviews and selects final candidates, which may go to a broader group of the board. So a lot of power in that committee to bring diversity to the board. But I would say, even if you aren't on that committee, when you do get on your first board, be the person who has a diverse contact list. So when the nominating process begins and your committee asks the full board, do you have anyone that you think is going to meet our expectations? You can share diverse candidates with your fellow board members and with the search firms and continue to help drive diversity, because I think we all have power to support that.
That is great advice from all 3 of you, so thank you. Many of our audience members are women who are looking for their first ever board position, particularly in a corporate board or a private company board, as we saw through the survey results. So what would be your advice to them? And Francesca, we're going to get started with you.
Okay, thanks, Ann. First, I would say, get your board bio completed and put together your list of contacts. As I mentioned earlier, Donna also said a word which I had written down as well, which is be curious. Be curious, learn all you can from those contacts, spend the time understanding them. It's really, really important. And then be prepared when you get a call or you get sent a position description for a board role. And, after all of my calls, I came up with a list of 7 questions that I have asked myself. And, the first 2 are pretty basic, but important. Do the board dates work in your schedule? You have to be able to attend the meetings, and they usually have 1 to 2 years out there. And the second, is there any conflict of interest with your current employment? And once you clear those 2, my other questions are, is it clear why they want me? And am I interested in this? Fourth is it clear what I will get from the experience? Because this should be a two-way street. Fifth, what do I think of the CEO? Is the CEO setting the right culture? Is there stability in that position? If not, why not? Sixth, what do I think of the rest of the board? Are these colleagues that I want to go through tough times with? And seven, which also was mentioned earlier, is do I have a passion for what this company does? And make sure you're very interested. One of the pieces of advice that I hadn't thought about, which I got from my former CEO, is like, you're going to be doing this probably if you join a public company for the next 10 years. It's not like employment where if you don't like it, you may decide to go somewhere else. You're going to be doing this for a while, so make sure you have a passion for it. And then if you do get selected for an interview process, do your homework. For me, that meant reading everything I could find about the company, reviewing the corporate website, Google searches on the latest news, what's happening with the company, Google searches on every person I was interviewing with. And that was, usually it's several of the board members and the CEO and potentially HR and others from the company. I looked on LinkedIn and said, okay, are there people who may know the current CEO or board members, and how can I get further insight? And then preparing for those calls, having a prepared list of questions for every interview. And one of the first questions they normally will ask you is, tell me about yourself, which is very broad. And so it's important to have that very short elevator speech and respond to that in an effective way. Understand, why do you want to sit on a board and be able to talk about that? Understand what the role of the board is. Donna talked about that. And I think that question from the board is very important, that you understand that the way I describe it is you're governing from the balcony, right? You're not on the main floor. You're certainly not on the stage. The role of the board is, returns to shareholder, CEO succession, long-term strategy, and supporting management with expertise. It's not actually being a member of the management team. And that's an important discussion that we have at the boardroom. And then again, what board experience do you have? And again, that's especially important for first-time board members, if you can connect that to other experience, even if you haven't been a board director in a for-profit company. So that would be my advice for securing your first board position.
Great, thanks, Francesca. What advice would you have, Suzanne?
Well, I absolutely agree with everything that Francesca said. She did that extremely eloquently, and the 10-year horizon is very real, and a lot of people don't understand that's an expectation in terms of how long you ideally would sit on a given board. So making sure that you really want to spend the next 10 years of your life associated with that organization is good advice. One other thing that as a recruiter, we often ask very early in the conversation is, do you have permission to serve? And this would be a conversation that you would probably first have with your hiring manager. If you don't report to the CEO, if you do report to the CEO, it would be that person, and then they probably will talk to the general counsel, who then may talk to board members as well of your current firm. So making sure you don't get too far down the path with in interviewing and getting to know a company and then find out that you're not allowed to serve. So doing that sooner rather than later is always a good thing. They still may want to vet the given company, but you need to understand their philosophy around board service if you're an active executive. One of the other things that we've talked about in terms of preparation, Francesca mentioned the board bio, and I briefly mentioned the board brand. But if you assume that everyone around the table in the boardroom will have experience with strategy, will have experience with talent management because of where they are sitting in their career, some of those areas are what I would call table stakes. What you want to do on your board bio specifically is really be very specific around your points of differentiation of what do you add to the board that is going to be unique and be align well with where the company wants to head, either from a strategic perspective, a governance perspective, or a fiduciary perspective. And this is taking a look at your career specifically around, you know, what is your functional experience? What is your geographic experience? What is your industry experience? And then what I call is, what is your situation experience? So an example of that would be, you know, a company that's about to go through an IPO. Have you done an IPO already? Or have you been involved in certain types of litigation that they may be facing, where you can say, hey, you know, I've been there, and here's how we handled it. So those unique situations that companies sometimes find themselves in, where you could add value by your experience and your perspective. So that's what defines your board brand, and a combination of those, usually 3 to 5 of those at the top of your board bio, to really show how you are especially kind of fit to that particular situation, often goes a long way as well.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Donna?
Yeah, I think, boy, you just got 2 really great points of advice, Francesca. I loved your list, and I was just thinking, oh, perfect. You know, you really have given great advice, and Suzanne, very practical advice. So I would just say, is there hope for first-time board members? Maybe we talk about it that way. And in Suzanne's data for the Fortune 500, I'm looking at her chart. This last year, 31% were first-time board directors. So in my role on the boards where I serve on the nominating and corporate governance committees, we do consider first-time board members and have brought on several over the years. But in doing so, we're looking at the board skills matrix. And as both of the ladies have said, we really are looking to fill the gaps that we need on the board. So we need to be able to see clearly that you, as a board member, potential board member, have the demonstrated experience and expertise that we're looking for. And it also is very helpful for us to be able to see that you understand board governance. And that may well come from a nonprofit board. I know one first-time board member they brought on one of my boards, who she was chair of a well over $1 billion children's hospital in Ohio. And, you know, of a major board, including the executive committee. Clearly, when we started talking about governance, she had it down, even though she had never been on a for-profit board, but she was able to demonstrate it well. And then finally, you know, we're also looking for those skills that I mentioned earlier, that are those softer skills of being able to fit. It's the right fit with our board culture. So understanding and then appreciating that. And then once you get there, and you know, hopefully we'll get there. Once you get there, what we do is we want to make sure that we're very inclusive with our first-time board members so that they will be successful. So we generally establish a board buddy program to coach and mentor them. And if they haven't done so beforehand, we recommend that they take some type of a governance course. I happen to sit on the National Association of Corporate Directors Board Certification Director Certification Program board. And so I have recommended that one, the NACD Directorship Certification Program, for new board members on the boards that I serve. And they have found that it provides a great foundational role of defining what is the board's responsibilities and how do you exercise those responsibilities well without stepping into management land.
And Donna, would you say having that certification might help you get on your first board, or not necessarily?
I don't know that it necessarily helps you get on the board, but it does show your understanding and willingness to commit to your own professional development. And I think that helps. And maybe Suzanne, you could talk about, you know, how you look at that when you see that on someone's resume.
I completely agree with you. It shows that you're serious, and that you've invested the time. It's a 6-month self-study program with a proctored exam, so it's it's definitely a commitment that you're demonstrating. But I would say that people don't necessarily get on boards because they have the certification. It helps you also feel more confident when you're interviewing for the role, that you know what they're talking about, and that you speak the language and understand the role of the board. There are other places that you can go for education, and it really just depends what you're looking for. We're all based in Chicago. I know Northwestern Kellogg has a fantastic program for women who are aspiring to be board directors, that you can go on campus for a couple of days and also meet a wonderful group of women in the process. But a number of the major universities have similar programs. All of us are participate in Women Corporate Directors, which is an organization for those of you on the call that already sit on for-profit boards. It's continuous education for those of us that are already directors. So the learning never stops. There's always opportunities.
So can you share, any of you, all of you, what are the pros and cons of being part of a public board or a private board or a nonprofit board, and what benefits do each offer? Does anybody want to take that first?
Well, I can jump in on the public versus private because I'm on a family board and a private board and public boards. There's a difference in terms of the process and the governance requirements on a public company board than there is on a private company board. So just think about some of the governance steps. But that said, in all cases, you're really trying to determine how to build long-term sustainable value for the shareholders. And so sometimes the shareholders are not at the table and you are the representatives. In the case with a public company board, sometimes the shareholders are sitting across the table from you because they're the family that owns the business and you can get their point of view right away. But it's just a difference of the, what's the kind of the governance structure and process that happens within that boardroom. But in terms of why you're there and the value that you're intended to bring, it doesn't matter what the structure is. You are there to provide guidance and counsel to help drive that long-term value.
And I would just also differentiate. People talk about public versus private, but within private, there are a number of different types of private entities that have different characteristics too. So I sit on a family-owned company board, and you've got the family dynamics. There are ESOP, employee-owned boards that have their accountability to the employee shareholders. There are private equity boards that have a different dynamic. So also just understanding the differences between each of those. And the piece of advice that I often give first-time board members is make sure that your first board, you can hit a home run on that first board, because it's leveraging all of your skills, and it's right down the fairway in terms of mixing sports metaphors here, right down the way in terms of what you do and you're really good at. Because at the end of the day, once you serve on one board, your future boards will be referenced off of your board experience more so than your executive experience. So you really want to make sure that the first one you show up in a very strong way. And sometimes everybody aspires to be on a public board, but sometimes the private board is a really good place to start and learn, and then kind of graduate to a public board as the next step as well.
Great, thanks, Suzanne.
I just add to what
Please.
Suzanne just said, because as I was just getting started a couple of years ago, and you start to get all these phone calls and you're not sure which ones to take, it's important that you understand your skill set, which is what Suzanne just said. And I spent 30 years at McDonald's Corporation, a Fortune 500 company, right? That's what I know. And I was starting to take some calls from private equity companies. And I recognized that, what they were looking for was somebody who was going to roll up their sleeves and be almost a supply chain employee, especially if these companies are just getting started. And I just recognized that that wasn't my skill set anymore. I not working in a Fortune 500 company. So I do think it's important that you think that through. And as Suzanne said, when you think about what are those unique skill sets you have in your board bio, what's that, first sentence, that you recognize what your strengths are and how you can effectively support boards with that. You're on mute, Anne.
Okay, we have a few questions from the audience. One is, Suzanne, can you elaborate on how to best find a communication expert to help someone put a board bio together?
I do have people that I recommend, and Francesca, I think you made the comment about using somebody to help you with yours. I always hesitate to send out examples because then everybody's is going to look like everybody else's. But you can easily Google board bio, and the difference between a board bio and a resume is usually a resume is a chronological summary of your career experiences with your outcomes or results for each of the roles that you served, et cetera. A couple of pages. Just to be clear, you're going to want that as well. But the board bio is usually a one-page narrative that really, as I mentioned earlier, establishes your board brand. So they understand what over your cumulative experience of 30 plus years in the industry would you say are your top areas of contribution to a board, and then providing evidence against why you're a subject matter expert in those areas by pulling out of your resume what qualifies you as an expert in those areas, as well as a paragraph around other board service and your education, et cetera. But it's really meant to crystallize where you want to spend your time as a board member. And so a lot of that can be done just with some soul searching by yourself, and then somebody else can crisp it up. But nobody can really write it for you if you haven't done that thinking first.
That's great, Suzanne. Thanks for the advice. Francesca or Donna, do you want to add to that? You're both on mute.
Yeah, I think she's captured it well.
Same.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's another question. How do you assess when in your career is a good time to seriously begin your board journey and search? Any thoughts? Donna or Francesca?
I can start just by saying, if you're not on a non-for-profit board, which almost half the group is not, the time is now. Really find something that you have passion about that connects to you personally, and get started with non-for-profit board work. It does provide all the benefits that you heard Donna and Suzanne talk about earlier, and it shows that you have time for things besides your full-time employment and your family, and that you have other interests and that you care about things. So do that straight away. And then, as I was thinking about my board search, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a board member at McDonald's said to me, you know what, if I think you should wait probably, till your next position at McDonald's. So it was right before my C-suite job, because she said, you've been in this organization for 30 years, you're Fortune 500. If you want to go on to that type of board, you really need to be in a C-suite position to do so. So I think first you need to determine, what type of board you're interested in, and where you can add value. And because you can start much earlier in your career. I mean, Donna was a young woman when she had her first board position and was super successful. But for me, it was first that connection to who I am and where do I want to be. And then making sure that you have the experience and the expertise to actually even be considered for those types of roles.
That's great. Thanks, Francesca. Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just add, Suzanne mentioned it earlier, but I think it's helpful if you're still in an operating role, because oftentimes boards are looking for someone, especially when they're looking for younger members that are actively engaged in an organization and can bring some real world practical advice. But what's critical is that if you are in an operating role, that you get the support, not only the the approval that you can go on that board, but the support that says that yes, you can take those days. If it's 4 or 5 meetings a year, you can take those days out of the office and show up in that other boardroom, and that your CEO will respect that time.
That's great.
The one other thing that I would add is one of the important things about serving on a board is making sure that you've got enough time to do it well as well. And there are certain times in your career where you've just been given a new role and you're going to be up to your eyeballs in working through issues you've just inherited for the next 9 to 12 months. That's not a good time to join a board, or from a family and work-life balance perspective, that you can keep everything in balance too. So doing some soul searching around that is always a good time. The other question that I often get is sometimes people are in transition. They've left their most recent employer and they're trying to decide whether or not they should take another executive role or just start building out a board portfolio, or both. My advice to them is always find your executive role first. Make sure you've got permission, make sure that you get grounded if you're considering doing both. And then look for the board role versus vice versa, because you may end up getting on a board and then finding a position that you really like, and for whatever reason there's a conflict or they're not comfortable with you serving, etc. So just making sure you do things in the right order as well.
Thank you, all three of you. We have time for one final question, and that's, how can someone find boards to join? Do we wait for people to reach out to us, or should we be doing something more proactively? So what would be your best advice for this? And we could just quickly go around, the three of you, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Well, I'll jump in if that's okay, because my personal experience, which you've heard on this call, is that it's all about the power of building relationships and networks long before you need to tap into them, and building your resume and your track record of success along with those relationships, because ultimately those will be the opportunities and the relationships that will open the doors for you. You heard it from me and my background. I heard it in Francesca's story and Suzanne's story. So, kind of build those relationships with a pay it forward, not with an expectation of a payback, but a pay it forward, and it'll serve you well.
Thank you, Donna. Francesca?
I agree. I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, Suzanne?
I call it the friends and family program. Building out your network, letting them know that you may be interested in board service one day. And even if you're not ready, just, if you're having coffee or breakfast with somebody, getting tidbits in terms of how they started and what their advice is, and maybe planting that seed, but not necessarily actively, I'll call it, campaigning like you would if you were out for an executive role and floating your resume everyone. Ideally, you get asked to come to the table. You're not out promoting yourself, but planting those seeds along the way, as Donna said, with those relationships can go a long way, especially if people have seen you in action.
Ladies, thank you. This has been an absolutely amazing discussion. Thank you to Awesome and to Francesca, Donna, Suzanne for sharing your insights and your lessons learned with us. And to everyone on the call, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you'll continue to come back to learn at future Awesome Transformation Leadership Panels. Seriously, ladies, thank you so much. We appreciate all your insights.
Thank you,
everyone
Ann.
have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Take care.